What are we in for in the fight to make the whole Mueller report public? Let's bring in Chris Daszak, former senior investigative counsel for the House of Representatives and former assistant attorney general with the New York State Office of Attorney General. So, Chris, Mueller, as we just heard, provides a confidential report, goes to Attorney General Bill Barr. Barr can produce a summary, and you know what's going to happen. Everyone's going to want to read between the lines. They're going to demand to let it all out. They'll be looking at anything's redacted, what's behind there. I mean, this thing is going to get, questioned up the wazoo.
You're right, Eric, and they're going to look between the lines. So I think what's going to happen is, rather than after it goes to Attorney General Barr, and he certainly has the legal authority to decide what he releases to Congress, but I think what's going to happen here, and this is related to what you said about reading between the lines, Congress, if Attorney General Barr decides not to release the report itself and just a summary, Congress will, and I think should, issue a subpoena for the report. If they issue a subpoena for a report, the key thing is obviously to redact anything that's classified. But other than that, this report should be public. The American people paid, I think, approximately $25 million for it. There were serious allegations made, and one way or the other, everybody should know. This report could turn out to show the allegations were that the president or people who work for him were somehow involved with collusion with the Russians. If that's the case, and this report demonstrates that, then that can be pursued one way. At the same time, it's important for the American people to know, if there's nothing like that uncovered, and after almost 2 years and $25 million, if there's no evidence of that, the American people should know that too. And again, that could be obtained through subpoena by Congress.
Critics will say, is there a collusion illusion, or is in fact that meeting in Trump Tower, where Don Jr. and others thought they were meeting with the Russian lawyer representing the government, as the email said, in support of Donald Trump for president, how Mueller will come down on that, or whether or not that was, in fact, a meeting of collusion.
Exactly. And the only way to get to the bottom of it is not the read between the lines, as you said, Eric. It's, the American people, they can read the report themselves and make their own determination. So with respect to that meeting that you're referring to, or any other issue, including the Steele dossier, the role that played in this investigation, because he came out recently and said he didn't even confirm certain aspects of the information that ultimately found their way into a FISA warrant. So this isn't just about one thing or the other. This report should really shed light on everything rather than guessing games and rumors.
And when you say everything, will that get into the funding of the Steele dossier? We've heard a lot about the DNC and Hillary Clinton's campaign and Perkins Co., being behind some of this, and supposedly the FISA court not being told about that.
Sure, that's a key issue. When you go to the FISA court, a federal judge, and you ask that federal judge to listen to the conversations of Americans, that's a serious matter. And if part of that was based on information that was politically derived or derived for political purposes to hurt someone, then that should certainly be known.
Meanwhile, this is not the only investigation ongoing. You have several others. Here's what Congressman Harley Ruda said about that.
The Mueller report is only one of 3 investigations going on right now, and it's focused primarily on what transpired during the campaign. You also have what's going on in the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of Virginia. So we tend to focus on the Mueller report being released and that's going to answer all questions. It's not. It's one of 3 major investigations going on.
Yeah, and some say the Southern District, the federal investigation here in Manhattan, is the most important because they're looking into the Trump organization, businesses, and allegations of Michael Cohen, testifying that the Trump organization inflated assets on insurance forms while deflated for tax purposes, and some speculation that there may have been some hanky-panky in that Deutsche Bank a mortgage in terms of your assets. You served in the Attorney General's office here in New York State. There are charges already from the Manhattan District Attorney's office that have been filed against Paul Manafort. What type of pitfalls are for the president in the future for this? Because you can't pardon out of that one because it's a New York State or local investigation.
You're right. And the pitfalls depend on what the substance, if any, is during these investigations. But the pitfalls, if the Southern District of New York uncovers any information about financial misdeeds with respect to whether it's the inaugural committee or any real estate deals, then there are obviously pitfalls. And as you pointed out, Eric, if the Manhattan District Attorney's Office pursues this case against Paul Manafort, there is no pardon. The only one thing that everybody should keep in mind is any information that comes from Michael Cohen has to be independently verified. He's an admitted liar. He's going to prison for lying, and he clearly has animosity toward the president. So it's okay to follow up on his leads, as you have to in a government investigation, as long as that information is verified by either independent documents or independent witnesses.
Well, the reports say that Deutsche Bank is cooperating, so wouldn't this all be in the paperwork? Wouldn't there be a paper trail if there was something wrong, or if it is all kosher?
Well, there would be, if there is something wrong, or if it's kosher. Either way, you would have a paper trail, and presumably, because if they do have Deutsche Bank's records, I've reviewed very sophisticated bank records for investigations that I've handled when I was in the government, and they're extremely detailed. Deposits, withdrawals, transfers. So there would be a paper trail, and it should be easy enough one way or the other to get to the bottom of it.
And finally, Chris, okay, your prediction on when we're going to see the Mueller report. I mean, everyone for weeks have been saying it's almost there. Andrew Weissman, others, I mean, they're peeling off. The investigators and the top officials are going back to private practice and law schools to teach. That's got to be a pretty good tip-off that it's really winding down.
I'm comfortable, Eric. I'll make a prediction that the report itself will be released, and if I had to guess, I think it's going to be released through Congress via a subpoena. In terms of the timing of the release of it, that I wouldn't guess, because as you know, they've been saying it's going to be released in 2 weeks, just in public, not Mueller's team, but they've been saying it's going to be released next week for at least a month. So there's no telling when it's actually going to be released. And the only guy who knows is Bob Mueller.
Yep. And he, I guess, ain't talking.
He ain't.
Chris stays there. Chris, always good to talk to you. Thank you for your insight.
Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham blocked a Senate vote on the House measure that called for special counsel Robert Mueller's final report to be made public. Let's bring in Mark Penn. He's a former Clinton advisor and pollster. He's also managing partner at the Stagwell Group. Mark, your reaction to Lindsey Graham blocking this most recent procedural vote. What's going on in Congress these days?
Well, first of all, not much is going on in Congress these days. There's a lot more show votes than there are real votes on the matters that people want done. But I think Senator Graham here was really saying, yeah, I want the Mueller report to be transparent, but I also want a second independent counsel to be appointed to investigate what was going on with the FBI and the DOJ during all of these investigations. And I think that's the point he's making. There's obviously going to be and have to be significant transparency about what Mueller did. But likely there already is significant transparency, since Mueller has brought the cases that he's going to bring.
Right. And we've talked about this for a year and a half, Mark. You've written about this a lot. We're not expecting collusion in the Mueller report. The Mueller report should be out in the next 2 weeks. What are you expecting, and what is your reaction to what you heard from Congressman Doug Collins earlier and Congressman Ruda?
Well, look, what am I expecting? I'm expecting a report that dwells significantly on what the president did relative to the obstruction of justice. I don't see obstruction of justice here, but I think the report could dwell on that. And then on collusion, I think ultimately the report has brought not a single case related to that in any clear manner. So how could the report itself actually focus on that or find it? It can't. Nothing was brought. So I think we know the conclusion, and we know also increasingly as these transcripts come out that the underlying foundation for this investigation never really existed. That the Steele dossier was never verified and never should have been the basis for this. And the firing of Comey that triggered the independent counsel also had no basis in fact or law to create an independent counsel.
Yeah, so the special counsel should never have been there in the first place, and we know how they handled the Hillary Clinton investigation. Jim Baker apparently testified that he wanted to charge her with gross negligence, but the DOJ said no. Your reaction to these directives coming from Loretta Lynch and Barack Obama's DOJ?
Well, the Lisa Page transcript really is quite stunning, because what Lisa Page is saying is that the Justice Department, before the investigation was really done, said that they were not going to prosecute. Therefore, the fact that Comey then says no one knows the conclusion, right, is a lie. It's a laughing matter, because of course he knew the conclusion. The conclusion had been dictated before the investigation began.
Yeah.
This is really significant testimony from Lisa Page. I don't understand why the Inspector General didn't understand this.
Without accountability, nobody is going to trust the DOJ and the FBI for a long time. Mark, good to see you, sir. Thanks very much. Mark Penn, thanks for joining us on Sunday Morning Future.
Let's bring in former U.S. Attorney Guy Lewis, joining us live there. Thanks for being with us today on this St. Patrick's Day. So I want to ask you first, the only person, as we just heard Molly say, the only person to see the final report is Attorney General William Barr. His office knows what the vote so far in Congress has been and how the president feels about it. What do you predict is going to happen with this information? He's indicated he'll release some, but will he release all?
I think I take him at his word when he testified at his confirmation hearings that he's going to do everything he can to release it. So I think you're going to see a large report that sort of connects the dot here in terms of how Mueller started and where we are now.
All right. Yeah, we're going to have to wait and see what happens. But a lot of people obviously, pushing for as much information as we can get out of this. I want to pivot here and talk about the former Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. A lot of news this week. Just minutes after Manafort heard his sentence in the federal case, Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. announced a 16-count indictment on a year-long residential mortgage fraud scheme. We're reporting on this in New York this week, which included conspiracy, falsifying business records, and on it went. He could get 138 years if convicted on these new state charges. So I wanted to ask you what you think will happen here, because these charges will stand even if the president pardons him on the federal case. This we know. But what do you make of the New York charges?
I think for the most part that it was grandstanding. I mean, in my experience, having done this for almost 40 years now, you almost never see a guy prosecuted once in Virginia, a second time in D.C., and then a third time up in New York in a state jurisdiction. So yes, while the president may have limited pardon power as it relates to the state charges, New York also has a double jeopardy clause in their Constitution. So I think they got big problems in terms of the charges up in New York. I don't think they're going to stand.
You don't think they're going to stand? I mean, these are a lot of charges and a lot of time he's looking at if convicted. What if it's just a portion of those? A lot of people are discussing this week, asking if Cy Vance has a problem with this double jeopardy issue, or if Paul Manafort, is he still up against the wall with the new case because the state charges have substantially different victims?
Having sat down and done these kind of cases where, as a federal prosecutor, when I was U.S. attorney, sometimes you'd see a state prosecution and it wouldn't turn out. Say in a civil rights case, it was just really a miscarriage of justice. And so you'd look at it and you'd say, you know what, we need to prosecute. You look at Manafort here, and to be honest, the guy's almost 70 years old. He's going to do about a little more than 8 years in jail. Really, what is the justification for charging them in state court, especially when the charges, for the most part, overlap and are virtually the same thing?
Right. Well, and he obviously talked to the judge about that, asking for the judge to consider his age, where he's been at in his life and with his family. So, we'll see how this moves on with the case in New York. Guy Lewis, I want to thank you for your time, for being here and lending your expertise. Thank you so much.
Got it. Glad to.
California Congressman Harley Ruda, he serves on the House Oversight Committee. He's a member of the new Democratic coalition. Congressman, it is good to have you this morning. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning.
So you voted for the Mueller report to be public. Was that a political stunt, as you just heard?
No, I don't think it was a political stunt at all. What we saw leading up to that vote was the president suggesting that perhaps it didn't need to be released, and concerns with the answers by the Attorney General to be spot on and saying it would be released. And Congress did what it's supposed to do, take action to make sure that this very important information that the public really wants to see and provide the appropriate transparency into that investigation is into the hands for all of us to digest, understand, and contemplate what needs to take place next.
So what do you think about all of this that has taken place? I would imagine whether you're on the right or on the left, you want to make sure that our democracy stays secure and stays truthful. These cabal of people, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and others, Andrew McCabe, who's gotten criminal referrals, they put their finger on the scale to change the election and take down a duly elected president. You've seen all the evidence. What can you tell us?
Well, you're right. We look at that evidence, and it does require additional due diligence and investigation. But also, we can't use bad actors from the Clinton administration or otherwise as justification for not doing our job if there are bad acts taking place under the current administration. We are required under the Constitution to provide oversight. And I sometimes feel like this is like a middle school kids that are trying to justify their behavior by pointing to past behavior of others and saying, well, they did it too, so I'm allowed to do it, or why are you picking on me when you should be looking back at them?
I think that's a fair point.
All this needs appropriate oversight.
But, you know, we're looking at the oversight of the Hillary Clinton email scandal, and yes, you're going back several years in terms of looking in the backdrop, but was Hillary Clinton treated the way that you would like to see someone who did exhibit gross negligence with classified information? Was she treated fairly? Was that investigation a fair one?
Well, I just got to Congress, so I will point this out. The Republicans have held the House for the last 10 years. They've had oversight authority. They had full authority to oversee that investigation of the emails and Hillary Clinton. And look at what's concluded. There were no indictments. There were no convictions. And you look at what's going on, the Mueller investigation, we almost have 40 convictions and indictments already, and the report hasn't even been released. So
but just to be clear, those convictions have nothing to do with collusion or Donald Trump.
That's correct. That's exactly correct. So that's why we need to get through the report. And by the way, you also need to remember, too, that the Mueller report is only one of 3 investigations going on right now, and it's focused primarily on what transpired during the campaign. You also have what's going on in the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of Virginia. So we tend to focus on the Mueller report being released and that's going to answer all questions. It's not. It's one of 3 major investigations going on.
Congressman, let me ask you about this upcoming vote. Mitch McConnell has followed through on his promise to call a test vote on the resolution supporting the Green New Deal. Are you going to vote for it?
I would prefer to focus on Ted Lieu's legislation, which was going to be 100 by 35. That's going to be submitted to the 116th Congress. But I do think Mitch McConnell certainly is doing this for showmanship. He wouldn't put certain votes that are very important to reopening the government, but he wants to put this vote on the table to get people on record in hopes of embarrassing them.
Well, I don't know about showmanship and getting people on record to embarrass them. It is important for the American people to understand who backs something like this, right? I mean, we've got reports that the Green New Deal is going to cost $94 trillion and that it makes no sense that you could do away with fossil fuels in 12 years. Wouldn't it be important for the American people to understand who actually believes that this is actually doable and who actually knows that it doesn't make any sense?
What I think is important that we all recognize that climate change is real and that we have to take action. And while you can point to any legislation or proposed legislation and point out the faults of it, we cannot deny that climate change is impacting every citizen of our country and around the world. And so let's quit focusing on areas where we have clear disagreement and focus on the task at hand. And I wish Mitch McConnell would say, yes, climate change is real. Mr. President, you're wrong. Let's work together and figure out how to solve this.
Well, what about, I mean, is there a big pressure, do you feel pressure within your party to go along with some of these pie-in-the-sky ideas? I mean, you've got the Green New Deal, you've got Medicare for All, which wipes out the private insurance industry. You've got a tax on wealth idea from Elizabeth Warren, which is unconstitutional, and you've got a 70% tax that AOC wants. How much pressure are you feeling to go along with some of your freshman colleagues like AOC, even though many of the moderates don't believe that any of these things would actually materialize?
I don't feel any pressure at all, and I'll tell you why. The citizens of Orange County who elected me here recognize that I have moderate views. I come from a business background. I built companies up to 10,000 people. I believe in capitalism, and I believe in good government, and I believe they can work together. So whether the outlandish ideas on the left or right, I'm not going to support it. I'm going to work with my Republicans and Democrats who believe that most Americans are between the 20-yard lines and get good legislation accomplished.
Which is why you believe in border control.
Exactly.
Yeah. Congressman, it's good to have you on the program this morning. Thanks so much.